Assalamu alaikum, welcome to this new episode of Uncaged. Today we are with Muazzam Beg once again and myself, Anwar Mafil. We are focusing on what's meant to be the trial of the century, the hearings at the military commissions in Guantanamo.
Right. And so these military commissions, for those who don't know, have been going on in one way or another for almost 2 decades. Bearing in mind that September 11th happened in 2001 and we're now in 2020, not a single person has been convicted for the reason why Guantanamo was opened in the first place, and that is to prosecute the perpetrators of 9/11. What you've got at the moment happening are the kind of pre-trial discussions and interviews of people taking place, including, especially in these past few weeks, the 2 psychologists who were the architects of the enhanced interrogation technique program, i.e. the torture program under Bush. And that has been a great revelation in that these 2 individuals who profited in great ways. I think they'd earned something around 71 million pounds, dollars rather, for their role in essentially setting up and designing a torture program. And that torture program was carried out primarily against Abu Zubaydah, and then of course against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abdurrahim al-Nashiri, and then many others. In fact, the CIA Senate torture report identifies 119 individuals in 2014 when they did that report that had been subjected to torture by the CIA. And this program headed and drawn up by these 2 individuals, James Mitchell and Bruce Jesson.
Actually, we should say that not only they designed the program, but they also carried it out themselves. They waterboarded themselves up to 80 times or 81 times for Abu Zubaydah in a month, over 100 times for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
So they were active participants. They're not just the ones. They're not just the designers. They're the implementers. They're the executors of the program itself. Yeah.
And talking about the money aspect of it, they received $81 million to design and carry out the program. They also, from the very beginning, it was agreed with the CIA that they would receive a $5 million shield, legal shield, meaning that whenever they get sued, and they knew from the very beginning they would be sued, the CIA guaranteed that they would cover up to $5 million in legal fees. And 2 of the detainees that we know of actually sued them. That's Sulaiman Abdullah Salim and Mohammed Ben Saud. So maybe you can talk about a bit that.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things here is that, of course, we know that this money was earmarked by the CIA to protect them in the event that they get sued. But the other thing that the CIA did also is that whatever tapes they had of the recordings, because they recorded the waterboarding and the torture that happened, they destroyed those tapes. And so when the Obama administration came into power, they offered them an immunity, saying that none of these people, despite all of those things that had been placed to defend them and to protect them, will face prosecution. So the ironic thing is that these guys, James Mitchell and Bruce Jesson, are giving evidence of their role in what are essentially war crimes in court, in the full knowledge that they can say they did these things, but they're not going to be prosecuted. So what they did in the case of Sulaiman Salim and Mohammed Ben Saud is that they themselves were, because their names had become available as contractors, they were sued by these 2 individuals who were part of or had been subjected to the torture program, and they eventually came to a financial settlement out of court. But it brought into the public fore who these 2 individuals were. Interestingly, the other CIA agents and other individuals, including medics and doctors, have still yet to be named, and they are still protected.
And there's a number of things that have come out of these hearings that we already knew, things that you've been saying for a long time and other detainees have been saying for a long time. But talking about the crimes that they've carried out, actually there's something that they've been doing publicly. James Mitchell has written a book where he describes some of the detainees that he's tortured, and I think he's sold up to between 40,000 and 50,000 copies. So you're in a situation where someone is actually committing a crime and profiting from the crime. So you've mentioned something about other professions that have been involved in the torture.
Yeah.
Something that came out in the hearings is that the FBI admitted to passing on questions to the CIA torture team. So could you talk about this?
Yeah. So I mean, so this is one of the things that's come out in this, is that the role of the FBI, which we've always said as former prisoners held by the United States, whether in Guantanamo or Bagram, or people like Ali al-Madri himself, who held on US soil, said that the CIA, not only the CIA, but the FBI agents, you know, the good guys as it were physically and actively involved in the interrogations while people were being tortured. I know this for a fact because the first interrogators I ever came across when we were tortured in Bagram and Kandahar were actually FBI agents, not CIA agents, fully uniformed and fully dressed as FBI with, you know, identifying caps. So the role of these guys has clearly been mentioned here. There are others, for example, people from the medical profession. Now, the medical profession, you know, they make an oath before they come into office to do no harm, and yet they were physically, again, administering some of the waterboarding. So it's noted in the testimony of some of these individuals is that they were standing with clickers, literally clicking after each session of waterboarding was taking place, and counting and taking part and making sure that that they don't die. They're there to make sure that they don't die, but as long as they're getting waterboarded and tortured in that way, that's okay. Another thing that came up also was the use, that we know of the different torture techniques, but one of them is known as so-called rectal hydration. And that is when, in the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, they said, oh, he refused to drink water, so they literally forced something into his rear end, and that, as has been said, is nothing but sexual assault masquerading as some kind of medical intervention.
Actually, one of the detainees that is still in Camp 7, I think, had to wait for over 10 years to get surgery to correct that abuse. And without going into too much details, but I think it's important for people to understand the kind of things that were going on.
Yeah.
He was so severely tortured and raped that he needed surgery, and it took 10 years for him to get that.
And again, I can't stress enough the fact that this evidence is coming out in court in one of the most powerful countries, the court of the most powerful country in the world, and nobody will be prosecuted for admittingly taking part in this stuff. The other thing was, in the case of some individuals who were held at what's known as the salt pit or the cobalt camp, in particular Gul Rahman, which Asim Qureshi has spoken about in detail, about how he met his family and how he actually died in CIA torture. And again, there's been no accountability. He was killed in CIA custody, tortured by the CIA, and again, as part of this torture program for which these two psychologists were responsible.
Actually, there's been an autopsy carried out by a military doctor who said that the cause of death was homicide. And again, Obama came and said there will be no prosecution.
No prosecutions, yeah.
So what you're saying essentially is that there's a network of torture made of lawyers that authorize the torture, doctors, psychologists, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, and yet no one is accountable.
If anything, all of this process, remember, this is the backdrop to the preparation for the trials, which are set to take place in 2021 January. So a year from now, they say they're going to actually take to court those people that are supposed to have been behind 9/11. And this is the preliminary hearings for that. This has nothing to do with the crimes they've done. And they have said, James Mitchell has said, that it was a time when we had to defend our country, and I would do it again. And the other interesting thing, of course, is that when it really comes down to the gory details of the torture program, he says, well, the CIA went too far. Well, did you go too far? Because you were involved in the waterboarding yourself. You set it up. You actually justified it. You were part of the Sears program that was practiced on, and still is practiced on, the US military. So in what sense did they go too far? You know, that's a question that needs to be asked.
So it's some sort of game where no one is responsible and everyone is blaming each other. So the CIA is saying these guys are the one that designed it, these guys say they didn't implement it properly, and at the end no one is responsible. Well,
it's the old thing is about, you know, if the guilt is shared, where lies the blame? The answer is everybody is responsible. The other thing is that, of course, recently there's a film that's been that's come out called The Report, and it's won several awards. It's got famous actors and actresses in there, and it's now on Amazon. And this film details the people under Senator Dianne Feinstein's office who carried out the investigations and came across so many obstacles by the CIA and indeed by these two individuals who were involved in the program, and how eventually that report was produced, which identified and detailed the case of the torture that these guys carried out. So again, there's another layer of now Hollywood's waded in. Hollywood's come along and said this is all that happened, and it's got that stamp of approval in the United States there. But yet again, if anything, it should prove that there needs to be prosecutions against these individuals, but there's every single layer of protection over them. And simply even the conclusion of this report was, yes, we tortured people, no one's going to be prosecuted, we're not going to do it again in the future. And you can only imagine if that had happened with the case of any ordinary person that had carried out any crime and said, okay, if I promise not to do it again, Your Honor,
I'm free.
I'm free, and you won't prosecute me.
And something that is also very interesting to think about is that actually things are happening. They are happening. We have detention. We have complicity in torture, and Guantanamo is still open.
Of course.
So again, like that case of no accountability, we still have 40 people who are detained without trial or trial, except 5.
Some of whom who'd actually gone through this torture program. Some of those, like Abu Zubaydah, who's actually this torture program was designed to break him, and then others afterwards. So yes, exactly. And one of the reasons why somebody like Abu Zubaydah won't even be presented to the court to give evidence as an expert, and essentially somebody who's witnessed, experienced torture. Nobody knows it like him. Nobody's experienced it like him. Yet they can't even present him in a Guantanamo court to give evidence about other cases, let alone his own, because there again, you will have the testimony of a person bearing witness to and giving evidence about what the United States carried out. There's also, some of these the revelations in these past couple of weeks in the media through the hearings was the case of somebody known as the Preacher. So the Preacher isn't interrogated. He's not named, but he's just nicknamed the Preacher. And the reason why he's called the Preacher is because when he carries out the torture, he, in a kind of evangelical way, raises his hands and says to the prisoner, "Can you feel it? Can you feel it?" And so he becomes nicknamed the Preacher. And it's these sort of names they give to themselves. Like I remember in my time, there was somebody called the King of Torture and Monster who was involved in torturing prisoners. That somehow they almost praise themselves. They're proud of these titles. They're proud of being involved in this torture. It's like a badge of honor to abuse somebody in this way, knowing that there'll be no accountability.
I think maybe something to think about is that, there's 2 ways of knowing about those things. Number one is waiting for all the process and the legal process and the courts and the governments and the inquiries. And the other way is doing what CAGED has been doing, which is talking to the survivors, talking to the people who have been through it. And actually you'd realize that much of what's being said was already known.
Yes,
known, but what we have now is you hear it from those people that have done it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what's missing in all of this, and it's indeed even missing in the film, the report in Hollywood, is the voice of those who were targeted, who were subjected to the torture. The very fact that they're just byproducts in their own story tells us all we need to know about how this entire process, Hollywood included, that until they are able to let the prisoners speak for themselves, let those who were subjected to the torture to themselves, these processes are really an exercise in patting themselves on the back to say that we are really just, when in fact the greatest injustice is not allowing those people that you've tortured to have a voice in any way at all.
And that's why we'll continue to work on those issues. We'll continue to talk about Guantanamo. We'll continue to talk about torture until justice is done.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much. That's all we have for today, and see you for next episode. Wa jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.